Okay. And we are live. JT here, and welcome to the huddle. The huddle is where I sit down with successful people from the world of sport and coaching. It's to learn more about their journey to greatness. Why do I have these conversations? Because success always leaves clues. I want to take a moment to thank you, whether you are watching on YouTube or whether you're listening to the audio on the podcast. Thank you so much for being here with me and my special guest today. And here's my friendly reminder to you. The mind is like a parachute. It works best when it's wide open. So my challenge to you is to go all in on this conversation, to remove any distractions and get laser focused on the here and the now. And I guarantee you, you will gain a valuable nugget of wisdom that will not only help you succeed in sport, but more importantly, in the game of life. Been looking forward to my conversation with my special guest today. I had the opportunity to connect with him on social through a mutual connection. And, you know, it's one of the blessings of social media, allows us to connect with people that might not be in our, close physical proximity. And what really piqued my interest about him is he's doing some great work, and he's impacting lives, he's bringing attention, and he's really striving and aspiring to make this world a better place. My guest in the huddle today is Sach Latti. How are you today, brother?
I'm doing awesome, man. And I just want to say thanks for having me on, man. That intro was super nice.
I appreciate it, brother, and thank you. Um, Before we get started, um, one thing I always like to do is to count my blessings. And for me, it's a daily practice. Some days I do it better than others. But I do find the days where I'm most intentional, most consistent counting my blessings, I do find those days are a little bit filled with more love, joy, and peace. And I'm a big believer, biggest blessing you can give anyone is your time and energy. So I just want to thank you again, brother, for blessing us with some of your time and energy here today.
Oh man, thank you so much. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. So, again, I know we're going to get into your very interesting, very diverse journey, but we always like to start the huddle off with a little bit of fun. I often like to remind other people, myself, that life is a game, and games are supposed to be fun. I'm curious, what's an interesting fact that most people don't know about you that you'd be open to sharing with our community today?
Hmm. I'm a nerd, man.
Okay.
I love sci-fi. I love comics. I love Star Trek, Marvel, DC, the whole thing. And
Mhm.
I suspect people wouldn't think of that of me, I guess. These people around me don't.
Yeah. I'm curious with sort of the comics and superheroes, like is that something that's kind of always been something that's resonated with you, or is that something you found a little bit later in life?
No, man, my whole life, like honestly, do you know what kids back when you're younger collect hockey cards, baseball cards, all that kind of stuff? I never did that. I collected comic book cards and like comic book heroes and not comics as such, but like the cards. And yeah, I don't know what it was, man. I liked what the superheroes stood for, and I liked that they had powers, and I liked they could do things, and I don't know, I liked it.
Yeah. It's interesting. Like as you share that, I wonder, do you think that that's the connection for many of us, right? Like those superheroes, they have qualities that we all aspire to have, right? Like we all have our superpowers, and those superheroes, you see them sharing them with others, and typically they're doing it in the service of others. Do you think that
Mhm.
that's part of like the allure of superheroes and why we resonate with them?
I mean, I think so. I mean, listen, I didn't think we were going to talk about this, but it's cool
Uh,
that you asked that question and we came up with like the superhero thing. And I think there's an element of, for me growing up, I've always wanted to emulate that kind of stuff, like I didn't, I mean, maybe now in my life I'm a little bit better at it,
yeah.
but I don't know, my first sort of infatuation with superheroes was Lou Ferrigno and the Incredible Hulk,
Mhm.
right? And I must have been like 6 or something or 7 when I would watch it, and like when it was on TV, and then that was my first. I remember I used to live in Toronto, and I was at elementary school, and the school was called Russell Langmaid in Mississauga area, and they had a library in there, obviously, and super old school. And I went to the library, and they had a magazine, and on the cover was Lou Ferrigno as the Incredible Hulk. And man, it was an article, and I just kept reading it. I don't know what it was. It was the physique or whatever it was, and
Mhm.
the power and the strength. Anyway, so I've always loved paying attention to these things.
Mm. It's interesting as you share that it sort of around this theme of like potential, right? It's like it's you're seeing these superheroes fully utilize their gifts, right? In the service of others and really maximizing their potential in life. And it's interesting because I just think of the journey you've on and from, as I follow along on your journey, it's like you're doing the same for others now, So it's
Hmm.
it's interesting. Um, so I'm curious, you've been involved in a lot of different physical activity and sport. I think as in preparation for this, I saw that you have a background in bodybuilding, right? You have a background in jiu-jitsu and martial arts. And then over the last few years, you've taken up, you're an endurance athlete, the ultra marathon running. So I'm curious, physical activity and sport has been important for you in your life. I'm curious, what is that life lesson that you've taken from physical activity and sport? And again, I know there's many that you find you apply to other areas of your life today.
Discipline, discipline, 100%. I mean, it's the foundation. Without discipline, I'd be a mess.
Mhm.
Like I would be a mess. And the discipline that I learned through sport, I try to apply it in my day-to-day life and I've gotten much better at it now, but growing up, I was disciplined in certain areas with athletics, but not so much in the rest of my life. And I think over the last few years, I learned how to take that skill set that I know and that I already have, and then applied it in every aspect of my life. And so it's not so much that, I apply discipline once in a while. Now I try to apply discipline as a way of living. Um, so so yeah, discipline.
Mm. And I love the simplicity of that, and I love how firm you are, like discipline, like no if and or buts. That's what I've taken away from sport. What I find really interesting about your journey is now, as you are someone who engages in, as an endurance athlete, as an ultra marathon runner, like you say, like running hasn't been easy for me. So I'm curious, how has that sort of role on, taking on a new challenge, something that doesn't come easy, but the discipline, like how have you found that sort of like dance, we'll call it?
Mm. I think it's been really educational for me because entering a new space, i.e., running and ultra endurance running, I started as a white belt. I started fresh, and I was terrible. And look, I'm average at best now, but to start something at the age of 42, 43, I'm 46 now. So I started at the age of let's say 43 running. Um, the applying discipline at that age, it's a little bit harder to do something brand new when you're already comfortable doing other things that you're already good at.
Mhm.
And I think for me, entering into a different athletic space, I've learned so much about who I am and um, what I like and what I don't like through the endeavor of doing something new. And I think for me, it hasn't I think I recognize it more now, but in the past, I've engaged in things new, but not with the intention. Now that I have the intention behind entering something new, I think I can exploit or optimize it even further, if that makes
Mhm.
sense.
Yeah, it's interesting as you share. It's like that idea, like that discipline to in personal growth, self-development, they talk about like lean into this comfort, right? Embrace the discomfort. Like it sounds like for you, sort of allowing that, whatever you want to call it, the ego to sort of dissolve, and that white belt mentality, the beginner, the student mind. It's like you're just saying, yeah, you know what, I'm not gonna be very good at this at the start, but I'm gonna learn and grow every day. Like it sounds like for you that you sort of accepted that idea and you sort of just, took the ball and ran with it.
Yeah, no, 100%, man. Like that started even with jujitsu. I only started jujitsu 7 years ago when I turned 39. And it was again a brand new thing. But
Mhm.
I started and then even bodybuilding, I started really competing in bodybuilding at 28, right? So a little bit older.
Yeah,
So I've entered new spaces frequently so that I can learn as much as
yeah,
I can. So I think maybe that's I guess one of the positive things about me is the diversity of knowledge through different modalities.
yeah,
And what I've noticed is they're not different.
yeah.
They're all the same.
Uh, so it's interesting, right? And again, I appreciate you sharing because I knew you had taken running up, later, but I didn't realize like jujitsu and bodybuilding was later. So I guess the question I have for you is has that openness to new adventures, has that been something that you've always done, pretty naturally, or did you have, great, coaches, mentors, parents that sort of stressed this idea of like beginner's mind, white belt mentality?
No, no. I mean, I've this has been that's let me unpack that a sec. I think for me, the mindset I have now is absolutely new. It's been probably the last 2 or 3 years where I've really refined it and
Mhm.
honed it, and now it's me now. But I think growing up, like I wrestled in high school, and that was more of like, you know, I didn't even know what my parents weren't really athletic. They weren't into sports, the immigrants, right? And they thought, oh, they would say do physical activity, but they never practice it themselves. So
Mhm.
they didn't really have a knowledge base, right? And so I wasn't really surrounded by people doing fit things. And, I have an older brother. He wasn't really that fit either. So it was really, I felt a compulsion. I felt
Mhm.
a need. I don't know why.
Mhm.
I've always gravitated towards physical activity. Even in my darkest times, even when I wasn't as disciplined as I am now, I always tried to find physical activity. And I'm not too sure why.
Mhm.
Um, I think maybe because I'm meant to be in this space.
Mhm.
And I've always loved watching like people do awesome things physically, right?
Mhm.
And I remember as a kid, I mean, even I remember I was at home one time, long time ago as a kid. My parents were sitting there, and my older brothers there, and we're watching Rocky One. And man, I was just so inspired by watching that movie. I was like, I want to be a boxer. And now perhaps I could have been a boxer, who knows? But my environment wasn't supportive in that kind of mentality, so it never ever
Mhm.
happened. So when it came to real physical growth, it all came to me. I never had anyone pushing me to do anything.
Mhm.
Even in wrestling, my parents weren't really, maybe showed up to two wrestling matches throughout my 4 years. So it wasn't really it was supported, but it wasn't supported, if that makes sense. So I
Yeah.
think I've had to drive myself through a lot of the things, and that's where I am now. Yeah.
I appreciate you sharing. And it's interesting, like you, my parents were immigrants as well, right? And, you know, sometimes I remind myself that, I can only imagine what it would be like moving halfway to the other side of the world, not having much of anything, not having a ton of family, not having, a ton of money in the bank account, very limited, and building a life here. Um, and it's like you said, as I've unpacked it, I've started to realize because they were so focused on giving my brother and I, providing the basics, right? A roof overhead, food on the table, clothes on our back,
Mm-hmm.
that we were sort of left to, like, yeah, we had grandparents around, but a lot of it was figure it out, that discipline to get yourself to and from places, organize rides. But it actually turned out to be a superpower, right? Because you said that ability, because sort of trained us to, okay, I want something, I need to go out and get it. I need to put in the reps and sets to go and achieve
Mm-hmm.
that. So
Mm-hmm.
very, Very interesting how the stories are.
Yeah, I think it's similar. Like, I mean, a lot of people, I'm. It's probably the immigrant experience, to be fair, right?
Yeah,
Like people come here as new immigrants, and the priority is to put a roof over their head and things of that nature. And typically, at least in my culture, I grew up. I'm a Punjabi guy. My parents are Punjabi. Grew up in a Sikh household, right?
yeah,
So, you know, there is an element of physical there is a element of physical requirement in the culture, but my parents weren't that. My parents were all about academics and studying and getting good grades, and I wasn't that guy.
hmm
So as you can imagine, the discipline that was rendered upon me wasn't pleasant because my grades weren't the best. But
yeah,
having said that, look, I mean, I my parents did the best they could with the knowledge that they had,
yeah,
and and I think for me, it was kind of nice because I found my way eventually,
yeah,
and I found what I truly love, and I found my real purpose, and I think at the end of the day, that's all that matters, as long as you can get there and you figure it out.
yeah. It's interesting, right? In sport, we talk about it's like it's there, it's a life lesson on trusting the process.
Yeah, and the process is in every sport, it's the same, man.
Yeah.
It's the same. It's just
Mm,
get up, do the thing,
mm,
reflect, recalibrate,
mm.
improve upon it, and do it again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting. You start to just as we have this conversation, you start to remember how, when you really open up your mind, you start to see there's a lot more that connect us than right separate us, right? Often. So um I'm curious, one thing that I know previously, you're in law enforcement for 18 years. And before I go, I just want to thank you for your service because I
I
feel like
appreciate it.
that is some of the work first responders are do the true essence of selfless work. And just want to thank you for your service.
Appreciate that, man. Thanks.
I'm curious, you know, when you decided it was time for a new adventure, you then sort of blended this idea of, taking your experiences as a first responder and law enforcement, and then sort of combining it with this new passion for running. So I'm curious, what was that process like in that transition? Did running sort of help sort of the transition at this new chapter in your life?
Yeah, I think I've stumbled into it, to be honest.
Okay.
I was so 4-ish years ago, yeah, about 4 or 5 years ago, I was going through a separation, then I was going through a divorce. And um that really affected me because I was the squeaky wheel in the marriage, right? And so what happened was at that time, then the pandemic kicked off. And then also my work environment was starting to deal with certain things. So really from three different perspectives, my life started really crumbling, right?
Mhm.
And now I have anxiety and depression. I've had it for pretty much most of my life, but I
Mhm.
didn't know what that was up until a couple of years ago.
Mhm.
And when the pandemic kicked and the divorce started happening, man, it knocked me down. Like I was in a bad spot mentally.
Mhm.
And so to keep myself together and basically stay alive, I had to think of ways to kind of manage my mental health because it was all over the place.
Mhm.
And I read a couple books, and I wasn't a big reader back then. I read more now, but back then I wasn't really much of a reader. And I read Jocko Willink's Extreme Ownership.
Mhm.
And after I read that, I said, okay, time to start taking ownership of some of my issues,
Yeah.
right? And once I started doing that, then I started, had a bit of breathing room. My mental health was still not great. And I ended up having a major depressive episode during that time, seeing my physician and getting medicated, or at least getting medication to help with some of the issues I was dealing with. And then I picked up Can't Hurt Me, David Goggins' book.
Mhm.
And I read the first couple chapters out of it and I put it down. And I ended up finishing it about 6 months ago. But I read the first couple chapters, and really, that's all I really needed. And I thought, okay, well, and the way I interpreted that book was essentially the underlying theme for me was chase adversity, do hard things, right?
Mhm.
And for me, I interpreted that as physical things. And for me, at the time, running was extremely challenging, and I hadn't ran since high school, and so about 30 years. And and I sucked even then, right? Like I was on the wrestling team, I was the worst runner on the team. Like we would do mile runs, and I was the worst mile time. And so for me, I was like, okay, this is hard. So I started running. And then long story short, over a process of about 6 months, 9 months, a year, I started seeing some progression, and not physically, obviously physically, but more so mentally,
Mhm.
more so from my mental perspective. And, I started seeing ways that I could be of service through that.
Mhm.
And so when I started running, I was running, 3 times a week, 5K each time. And for me, that was a lot. And I was still like a bodybuilder size, right? So I was in and around 200 pounds, about 9% body fat. And and so it was a challenge for me to even
Mhm.
do that. And I knew nothing about running. I had no frame of reference. I didn't understand what was fast, what was slow, nothing, like absolutely zero.
Mhm.
And but for me, I ended up, you know, researching and then started watching podcasts, YouTube, trying to learn more about running, understand all the issues that I was experiencing in terms of from a physical perspective when it came to running, like all the aches, pains, this, that, and the other, finding solutions for them rather than quitting. I wanted to find solutions.
Mhm.
So through that process, I progressed, after about 6, 7 months. And I, let me take a back step. So also for me, whenever I enter anything, I always try to set goals on top of goals on top of goals. Because for me, I need to keep myself accountable. And for me, I need to push myself all the time
Mhm.
and test myself all the time. So after a few months, I started seeing some progress. I was getting, a little bit faster, and really more so the distances I was doing was a little bit longer than I had ever done. And I got to a point where I was able to run about 10K, 10 kilometers like about each day.
Okay.
And then I thought, okay, man, I had heard Cameron Haynes on a podcast. I think it was on Joe Rogan's podcast. And for your listeners, he's an ultra endurance athlete, and he would run, ultra endurance races, 100 miles, 200 miles. And he was training for the Moab 240, which is a 240-mile run in the desert in Utah. And he would talk about how he would train for that. And he would say that he would run a marathon a day in training. And when I heard that, man, I was floored. I was like, what? Like, I didn't even think people did that. I didn't think that was possible. I didn't think humans could even do it because I was so new to that kind of world, right? And I was curious. So that was the first thing. I was curious. And then
Mhm.
because I was curious, I started doing research and wanted to learn. And then I started thinking, man, I want to be able to do that. And that's kind of what got the ball rolling. So I pushed myself to a certain point. I heard that podcast in February of 2021. And not too later after that, I said, okay, I want to test myself. I want to see if I can run a half marathon every single day for a week, right? 21 kilometers each day. And so I started and I created a plan for myself, a 10-week training block. And I said, okay, I'll start with 11K, and each week I'll progressively increase it and go 12, 13, and all the way up. And then after 10 weeks, I got to 21 kilometers. And now they weren't pretty, they weren't epically fast, and but I still did them.
Mhm.
And for me, I never thought in a million years I could do that, like ever.
Mhm.
Like I wasn't that guy, and I was like, oh man. So that made me feel pretty good,
Mhm.
and that I was actually able to do that. And then I thought, okay, man, if I could do that, what else can I do?
Mhm.
Right? What else could? Because I didn't want to stop there. Like how a lot of times people say, oh, I want to do a marathon, and they do a marathon and they train all year for it, and then they're done. It's
Mhm.
like, man, you just did something you never thought possible. What else can you do? That was
Yeah.
my question, right? And so then I thought, okay, man, I can do that. Maybe I can leverage this for positivity and help people.
Mhm.
So as I'm a first responder in law enforcement, and mental health is a huge issue in the first responder space. A study was done in 2011 in the United States that revealed that 22 veterans a day commit suicide. So if you were to, incorporate, police, fire, everybody in Canada, that number really goes way up. So I thought, okay, let me do something positive here. And I scheduled myself to run 100 kilometers on the 7th of November 2021. And there's a town here. I live in BC, so I ran from a place called Chilliwack to the Vancouver airport, which was 100 kilometers. I ran that in just under 15 hours, and I raised $21,000 for the BC
Mhm.
Yukon Legion that supports veterans and first responders with PTSD. And so now, when that happened, I had a significant paradigm shift in perspective. I was like,
Mhm.
man, okay, well, I like this. I want to do this. I don't want to do what I was doing in terms of law enforcement. So again, um, I made a decision. I needed to start figuring out how to transition out.
Mhm.
Anyways, so long story short, I did that, and I was able to raise money. And then from there, it's I guess it's all history now, right? Like in terms of 2022, I scheduled a bunch of runs, and then progressively each year I increased all my stuff, and um and yeah, so that's kind of the journey where it started and
Mhm.
to where we are now, and with a whole bunch of running in between.
It's interesting, right? Like as you share that, it's a great reminder in the power of questions, right? How you say like, well, I can do this. What else can I do? Right. And it's interesting how, like you said, that paradigm shift, when you kind of break through that paradigm of what you think is possible, then
Mm,
all of a sudden it's interesting just how your mind starts to think in terms of possibilities instead of limits.
100%. Like I'm limited now by my imagination. That's it. I mean, honestly, that's it, man. Because I've done things now that I never thought in a million years I could do.
Mhm.
Sure, there's other people in the world that can do it probably way better. Like not probably, very like absolutely way better than me. But I just started running 2 years ago, man.
Yeah.
And for me, it's like, wow. So, then in 2022, I was like, well, since we did that, what else can we do? So I scheduled myself to run 9 ultra marathons in 9 months, starting in March and ending in November of 2022. And I did that, and we raised $16,000 for the Honor House Society through that process. And
Mhm.
the Honor House Society is a charity that supports veterans and first responders with mental health related issues. And
Mhm.
I did that, and then I was like, okay, now I'm kind of catching my stride, so to speak. Like,
Yeah.
after that year, I was like, okay, cool. Now we're kind of progressing pretty good. I got a coach on, like now I got a running coach, so he's kind of helping with mechanics, and we're trying to level it up. That first year was me just kind of figuring things out. What the heck? How do you eat for this? How do you fuel your body? All these types of things. And then 2022 was me entering the space of ultra marathons, which I'd never in a million years did. I didn't even understand that space.
Mhm.
Um, like what kind of people are there? Like, so it was me, it was an education from that perspective. I was trying to learn as much as I could.
Mhm.
And then in 2023, we were like, well, if the goal is, because my ultimate goal is to run across Canada in 2025. And I was talking to my coach, and he's like, well, if that's the goal, we got to have much larger training blocks than, what you're kind of doing. So we scheduled a training block in August of 2023, which was to run 22 marathons in 22
Mhm.
consecutive days. And that's what I did in August. And we ended up raising $16,000 for the charity. But I didn't just run 22 marathons as races. I ran across the province of BC.
Mhm.
So I ran in a town, started in a town called Revelstoke, which is on the eastern border of BC, which is, you know, BC and Alberta border, and ran from there all the way to Victoria, at the BC legislature. And it's about 1,000 kilometers over 8,000 meters of elevation, basically the equivalent of elevation gain of Mount Everest over those 22 days. And yeah, that's kind of what it's culminated to. And this year I have my plans, and next year, but in a nutshell, that's kind of what we've done over the last couple 3 years to see what
Mhm.
I can do and what's possible for me.
Mhm. It's interesting, right? Like as you said, like many high quality leaders, right? Like you're ambitious, you're driven, you're open minded, and it's constantly like aspiring for the next thing, right? It's not a question of if you'll hit it, it's just when. Like I'm enthused to see when you get across Canada. Like I think that's um I'm curious, what have you noticed like as you've been bringing more awareness, and again, obviously like you said, from your lived experience, through your own, through people you've worked with, you've probably seen some of the challenges that come through when you're a first responder, right? When you're in law enforcement. What have you noticed as you've ventured this journey and brought more awareness to that? Have you felt like the conversation's changing? People are more open to having conversation. More people are seeking help and support. Yeah, I'm curious.
So there's a couple things to that. I think first responder or not, it's all the same. I think many people are experiencing a lot of different things from a mental health perspective,
Yeah,
irrespective if they're first responders or not. So I think
yeah,
there's a commonality amongst everybody. Everyone's
yeah,
dealing with stuff.
yeah.
Everyone's got stuff. Number one. Number two, the conversation is growing, I think, and I do see it because I have been traveling across the country a bit, and people are talking more about it, mental health and the issues. Now, are they meaningful conversations? I don't know.
Mhm,
Um, uh, I'm trying to create a meaningful conversation. That's all I know,
mhm,
and I want to be able to create enough impact. And look, man, this is part of the reason why I want to run across Canada, man. And the goal is to try to break the record for the fastest run across Canada.
mhm,
Now, um, will I break the record? I don't know. I'm training to try to do it. Will I run across Canada? Yeah, that'll happen. But it's not really about me. I'm trying
mhm,
to do something. So this run across Canada really started. The idea started 3 years ago, and I was really thinking about it. And after I ran those 21K in that week, I immediately thought about Terry Fox because if I can run half a marathon a day, I'm not that far off from running a marathon a day. What I started thinking at that time was like I could run a half in the morning and a half in the afternoon. I can kind of run across Canada, and that's kind of what I started thinking. And then I started even thinking even more. I'm like, man, Terry Fox did something like 40 years ago. He galvanized an entire country around a common goal, which was cancer awareness and research and funding.
mhm,
And 40 years later, I consider mental health crisis our modern day cancer.
mhm,
And just wanted to figure out a way to try to galvanize as many people as possible around a common goal, which is mental health.
mhm,
And I started thinking, well, I'm running. If I try to break the record to run across Canada, that'll be, obviously a marketing and get more exposure. I'll be the first person to color to attempt to run across Canada. So that's another thing I feel that it's impactful for a few reasons because everyone remembers Terry Fox and everyone should, right? But what happens in another 30, 40, 50 years, right? I think the legacy still has to continue of
mhm,
people running across the country to do positive things for other people. We can't stop with Terry Fox, right? Like we always have to keep doing it. So I think
mhm.
these were the things I was thinking about while I was kind of coming up with something to um, engage and raise awareness.
Mm. You said something interesting there. Like you talked about, your intention to create meaningful like conversation. And I'm curious your perspective on this is, this idea of mental health awareness, it's out there, right? Like these, like people are aware that, like you said, this is very much a challenge with our health and wellness of everyone, right? Like people know someone impacted by, mental health. So I'm curious, like, what do you think from your perspective is the next evolution of it? Like people talking about it, people are aware about it. We have days and where, the country galvanizes around it. We have organizations that just focus around mental health. What do you think is the next evolution of this journey for us as a collective?
Mm, yeah, I love that question. I think myself and uh, my friends and people within my community, I guess, the next evolution as we see it is to take control of your mental health as an individual. And what are the things that, and we were talking about extreme ownership, right? What do we own as people to address our own mental health, right? What can we do before getting to that point where we need to see the doctor and get the medications, if we in fact need them? Now, there's a ton of things as individuals we can do to manage our mental health. I think also when people say mental health, they think about, they think about the, schizophrenia, this, that, and the other. Man, look, we're talking anxiety, depression,
Mhm.
um, you know, these types of things, ADHD, things that everybody has someone they know that they have it. And it can be debilitating to a certain degree. So there are many things that we can do. And as a professional athlete, they do the things that manage their mental health, if you think about it. Optimize your sleep, helps with mental health. Optimize your nutrition, sorts out your mental health. Connecting with people, right? That actually counters the antidote to depression is connection, right? So if you're able to implement those, getting outdoors and engaging in nature, going for runs on trails, like these things actually, when promote mindfulness and being present.
Mhm.
And if you're present and mindful, well, then now you're not feeling that much anxiety because you're in the moment. You're not thinking about the future or what may or may not happen. And if you're in the moment, well, you're not thinking about all the errors and mistakes that might have happened in your past, which is depression. So, there are a ton of things you can do. Now, if you do all those things from a holistic perspective, going fitness, exercise, all these things, and you're still, having difficulty managing it, absolutely see your physician. And if medication's required, then yeah, sure. But there are things we can do before we get to say, oh, give me the pill so I can just take a pill. So I think for me, I think that's the evolution moving
Mhm.
forward. That'll probably take some time, obviously, because
Mhm.
this conversation we're having now has been about a 5-year conversation, which will evolve probably over the next 10 years. And what I'm chatting about, maybe that happens in year 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, who knows?
Mhm.
But that's what I see the next evolution as.
It's interesting as you share that, right? You talked about some thought leaders, right? Whether Jocko Willing, whether it's David Goggins, who, their extreme ownership or Hermé, really the underlying theme as I read those books was around this idea of like personal responsibility, right? And you sort of touch on it, like what is actually in my control? I can choose to, you know, to decide what type of food I put in my body. I can choose to get outside for a walk or a run. I can choose to, turn off the phone and actually get some sleep. I can choose to take a few breaths. So it's interesting how it seems to be that theme around really reminding people that the power is always within. We sometimes forget, we sometimes, the power is like we feel like it's outside of us, but really when we come, like you said, back to center, balance, harmony, and remind ourselves that, you're one decision away from changing things, your outlook, life
Yeah, no,
just starts to feel different.
it's true, man. And look, I'm no, listen, man, I was experiencing that stuff a few years ago where, oh, I got to go to see this person. I got to do this. I got to do that. Tell me what to do. And like asking everyone. And until over a period of time, I realized I control everything.
Yeah.
I- I'm the, I'm the character in the story. I'm the first person shooter. I'm the guy who makes the decisions.
Yeah.
And once you're empowered to understand that and have enough built belief in yourself that you know that you can enter any space to crush it, then
Mhm.
then you understand that. Like so for me now, I critically think on a lot of things too. So I mean, you have to kind of be a critical thinker, right?
Yeah.
Like for example, you go see your doctor. Don't I mean, yeah, they're physicians, but they don't know everything, right? And from a physical perspective, I suspect I know more than most doctors, like at least GPs, right?
Mhm.
So you got to understand who you are and what your knowledge base is, and then also ask questions. What makes sense? What doesn't make sense? And
Mhm.
what best fits you? And in order to do that, you have to understand yourself. So, and to understand yourself, you have to go through a process. And to go through a process, that takes time.
Mhm.
So you have to do those things before you can be self-actualized. And it's all about being self-actualized, right? And knowing what you need and what you don't need. No one else knows more than you, right? But you have to know yourself first.
I'm curious, like from your perspective, because I think similar to you, like I was mentioning, today for an example, I was not feeling as sharp last night. Like I had an in-demand couple days, so I intentionally, like you said, took some responsibility, purposely carved out time this morning for, simple things like I shot the basketball with my kids for a few minutes before they went to school. I I didn't take any calls this morning, I went for a run, right? So I guess my question to you is, you know, for people like you and I who have learned the power of like when when you exercise discipline, when you take responsibility of your life, do you think it's possible for like what do you think needs to happen for someone to truly understand like I'm the master of my fate?
I mean, I guess it depends on each individual. Some people need to, I had to hit a rock bottom before I
Mhm.
had to make some decisions, right? My life was in the ditch. I screwed my life up for the most part, right? And so for me, I was like, okay, I need to unplug. I need to figure out what am I doing in my life that's creating all these issues.
Mhm.
Now, what does that require? That requires some reflection and honest reflection. You got to be honest, man. Like, look, and if your life isn't going the way it's going, and you're like, man, I can't catch a break, the problem is you because you're being a victim. You can't catch a break is a victim mentality, right?
Mhm.
So, and people don't want to hear that. I didn't when I first started going through this. I didn't want to hear it.
Mhm.
But the reality is, I was being a little bitch. I was being a
Mhm.
victim. I was being a whiny person. Oh, I can't get this. I can't get that. That's fine. Then figure out how to get it, right? And I started trying to figure out how to get it, and I started working. And it's not easy, man. It's really isn't. It really isn't to really understand who you want to be. But man, I tell you what, when you get there, it is nothing like it. There is nothing like it. Like the I've never had this level of, and don't get me wrong, I'm not perfect or anything, but this level of peace I have now, I've never had it before.
Mhm.
And the understanding of who I am as a person now, I've never had it before. So for me, when I say I want to train to break the record to run across Canada, I said that to people 3 years ago that were around me. They were like, "What? You're freaking nuts!" Like, I hadn't ran, man.
Yeah.
Then I'm talking about breaking a record. So what does that require, man? It requires also then getting people around you that are like-minded, that'll encourage you to do these things. Because
Mhm.
all the people around me at the time were not, right? So now I have to understand what kind of, so that helped me, pushed me forward. I could have been upset and quit and all the things, but I had to think about it honestly. Do I want to do this? Yes. Okay, what do I need to do? And start putting the pieces in place to make that happen. So have people around me that are going to encourage it and support it in their way. And then start, breaking things down from that perspective. But yeah, I was 100% victim mindset, and now I'm not. And I think the victim mindset is we have an epidemic of it in society right now, from my perspective.
Mhm.
Everyone's a victim. And there is, I mean, there is a fine line of being a victim and being discriminated against and all that kind of stuff. But I think I would rather not have that victim mindset. I would rather have the opposite of the victim mindset because then at least I can dictate and control which direction I want to go, irrespective of anyone else, because I get to put the work in.
Mhm.
And if I put the work in, I know I can get the job done.
It's interesting as you share that you know it's real easy, like you were sharing, to sort of go, why me, right? That sort of that conditioning that it's life is happening to you, or at least I was there for many years. Like life is happening to me, it's easy to blame, complain, criticize all the things that outside of you that have caused this. But it's
Mm.
interesting when you start to look at like, why not me? And I always like to think of it this way, that I'm being given this adversity, this challenge, this change because I am strong enough to overcome it, right? And I think, I don't know, I find there's something when you sort of remind yourself that this is actually a gift. Like maybe it's that power of the reframe, like this, that sort of that.
It is a gift, man. And so I'm happy you said that. It's empowering yourself to think positively. All it is a reframe of the positive mindset, right?
Yeah.
Reframe everything, and over a period of time, those reframings is CBT, is cognitive behavioral therapy, right?
Mhm.
If you if you repeatedly do that over and over and over and over, like a ton of times,
Mhm.
then you actually shift the way you think.
Mhm.
So I'll give you an example what I mean by that. 3 years ago, if it was super cold outside and pissing out, I'd be like, oh my God, I got to go for a run,
Mhm.
right? what I started doing, and I recognized that, what I started doing every time I had that thought looking outside, if it was crappy out or whatever, I'd say awesome, even if I didn't mean it, even if I didn't mean it.
Mhm.
And now, if it's crappy outside and I have that feeling, if I say awesome, then I get excited. I don't get anxious anymore. I get excited. And I learned how to shift that anxiety,
Mhm.
which is the same energy, into excitement, which is this more of a positive energy. And now I'm like, cool, man. But it took me time to get here because it just takes time. But now that I'm here, I see the benefits of it. Each time I go outside when it's super cold or crappy out, I know I'm getting stronger
Yeah.
because I'm building mental capacity. I'm building resilience. I'm doing something extremely difficult. And after I'm done doing that, now I've got that dopamine hit and I built belief in myself, observing myself doing something that I didn't want to do, and I just did it. So all these things are super positive, man. And it doesn't have to be a run. We can start super small with that. For me, it was my bed every morning a few years ago. My place was messy all the time because of my depression, all these things. I was just not good. So I had to figure out ways to create positive dopamine hits, even if they were tiny. Make my bed in the morning. Okay, cool.
Mhm.
Cool. I made my bed. All right. Not a huge thing, but it starts the ball rolling. And if you do that over a period of time, then you start adding to it and you start building to it and then you start adding things. And but I think maybe people get at the beginning of the process disheartened or worried or scared or am I on the right track? Am I doing the right thing? And I think in those circumstances, having a coach and a mentor is super helpful because you can be on a process and you can say, coach or mentor, whoever it is, am I on the right path? Am I doing the right thing? Like you're in the right direction, but you sometimes don't believe it. So for me, I had a mentor for a bit, or still do. He's a buddy of mine now. But when I was going through all this, he suggested a few things and I started doing whatever and kept going on the path. But I was still doubtful in my head. I still had that imposter syndrome. I still thought, oh man, I'm a loser, this, that, and the other. So every now and then I would engage with him and he'd be like, just keep doing what you're doing. Just keep doing what you're doing. You're on the right
Mhm.
path. So and that's kind of how it is. It's like if you're in the dark, you're outside in the forest. It's dark as heck out. You can't see anything and you don't have a light, but you have your map and you can see your compass. All you really need to do is shoot that bearing and go in that direction where the compass is showing you to go. You have faith and trust that you're going to get to the destination. And that's basically the same idea.
Mhm.
Faith and trust that you're going in the right direction. Just keep going, man. You make it.
Mhm. It's interesting how you bring up the idea of like faith and trust, right? And you think it back to how our conversation started was around, you said, sport has taught you discipline. And it's interesting because discipline is something where I'm not really sure how people frame that or their connotations. From my experiences, people view discipline as a lot of people view discipline as a negative thing, where it's like discipline is really the ability to give yourself a command and to follow through on it, which again is taking responsibility. And as we take more responsibility, we start to have more belief in ourselves. We start to feel better, and then we start to have faith, and we start to trust the process more, right? So it's funny how all these things are kind of interconnected.
And a super important piece to that is understanding that delayed gratification is very integral in the process. You
Yeah,
can't have everything right now. And man, I tell you what, I'm that guy. I want it yesterday.
yeah,
I want it like yesterday. That's how I am. I'm just that guy. But understanding that delayed gratification is important took me time to get there. Some people are
yeah,
better at it than me, right?
yeah,
But for me, it took me some time to get to the point where, like, okay, I got to just keep grinding and eating it for a while until I can see where it's going to take me. And now
yeah,
I see where it's going to take me.
yeah. I love
It's
it.
like university too, man. You go to university, that first year sucks,
Yeah,
right? But like, if you want your PhD, how many years you got to do it before you can believe that you're going to get there? How many
Mhm.
years you got to study before you know you're going to be a doctor? How many years do you got to train to get your black belt in jiu-jitsu? How many years you got to do this, that, and the other? Like, how long does it take to make it an Olympic athlete? 10 to 15 years. I
Mhm.
guarantee you, if you're in the top 5 percentile in fitness as a young child, and you put someone in 10 to 15 years in a program that's going to make them an Olympic athlete, they'll get there.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like It's not that hard. I mean, I don't want to sound like an ass, but it's not that hard.
Mhm.
You just keep training. You just got to be disciplined.
Well, and as you say that, like the idea of like delayed gratification, like patience, it's interesting how we sometimes, I often remind myself we live in a world that values convenience and getting here, right now, right? You think of simple things like how we can get anything delivered through Amazon Prime in a day, right? Like there's very little in our life that really teaches us about patience if we're not intentionally seeking it out, at least from my
Yeah.
my
And
experience.
that's no, absolutely. And that's where extreme ownership comes in and responsibility, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. And those conveniences are good.
yeah,
They're cool, man. We live in this world though, but we also have to understand that we have to create the people that we want to be, which is us,
yeah,
right? And what kind of person do you want to be?
yeah.
Do you want to be a weak person? Do you want to be someone that gets broken by the slightest little thing? Do you want to
Mhm,
be someone who can't manage their lives
mhm,
on a day-to-day basis? I guarantee you right now, you can throw almost anything at me now and I'll
mhm,
figure it out. I mean, it won't be easy, but I'll figure it out.
mhm.
Whereas like 5 years ago, if you threw something negative at me, I'd be like, oh my God, life's over, this, that, and the other. So for me, I chase adversity in every aspect now, like not just physical, like quitting my job for 18 years in law enforcement without any idea of how I'm gonna make money. I was scared, like I'm scared,
Yeah.
but I'll figure it out,
Mhm,
right? I made it this far. So what's important to recognize through that what I just said there is 3 years ago I couldn't do that, but I've done so many things that are difficult over the
mhm,
last few years that there's built belief and trust in myself.
mhm.
So it takes time to have that built belief because you have to do a bunch of difficult things to believe that you can do difficult things, right? So if you
Yeah,
don't do difficult things ever, you're not going to think you can do anything.
yeah.
So you have to do them.
I love it, brother. I'm curious. I want to be respectful of your time. I feel like you and I could probably have this conversation go on for hours and hours.
That
Um,
we could.
I'm curious. I know you have piqued people's interest. The question I have for you is, you know, what can we do to help and support you along your journey? Anything you're growing, where's the best place for
Mhm.
people to, yeah, really just learn more about what you're doing?
For sure. So I have a website. It's www.suchandmotion.ca, which kind of just talks about me, what we're doing, what the initiative is. My Instagram account, all my fundraising efforts are on there. So such.in.motion. I have a YouTube channel that hopefully over the next 5, 10 years we can keep growing. And eventually the goal is to monetize that so we can start, um, helping out the communities that are around. We can start sending money in various different areas. I'm also hosting my first ever fundraising gala on the 30th of March here in the Vancouver area.
Yeah.
I'll share that with you guys if anyone's in the area. It's going to be a TED Talk style event where we have 9 guest speakers speaking on their subject matter expertise as it relates to mental health and how it's impacted them, and it'll be a catered evening at the Sandman Hotel in downtown Vancouver, music,
Mm,
dinner, all that kind of stuff. But why this one is really one of its kind in all of Canada, and it is because I haven't seen anything like this. The type of speakers that we have are you won't get anywhere else. And
mm,
one of them is my mentor, Sean Taylor. He's a retired Tier 1 operator, Special Forces JTF2 plank holder. And what that means is Canada has a special operations team equivalent to Delta Force or the Navy SEALs, Green Berets, that kind of stuff. And he was the first person selected to be on that team when it was created
mm,
30 years ago. He's also an ultra endurance athlete himself, 24-hour solo mountain bike racer world champion. Another man is Seb Lavoie, who's a motivational speaker, CEO of Raven Strategic, also retired divisional sergeant major of the RCMP and ERT team leader. We have Travis Bader, who's the CEO of Silvercore Outdoors, who's another podcaster. Cal DeSange, CEO of Kids Play Foundation, which helps get kids out of drugs and gangs. And this, so we have a bunch of different amazing speakers, and
mm,
hopefully, if this event goes well, we'll be able to bring some of these in different areas across the
mm.
country eventually. But anyways, so that's what we're doing. Anyone in the Vancouver area, please hit me up. Tickets are $75,
Yeah.
and they go towards the Honor House Society and supporting my initiatives.
Awesome. And we'll be sure to share it out in the description on YouTube or on the podcast. So happy to share those out, brother. Again,
Yeah.
want to help and promote all the amazing work you're doing.
I appreciate that, man. And I would also love to commend you on your podcast. It's a good one, man. I've been tracking it and I like what you're doing and how you're doing it. And I'll talk to Corey, who's my co-host on our podcast, and we'll see if we can get you on and we can do this again.
Absolutely, brother. I appreciate it. And yeah, looking forward to more conversations. Um, I want to take a moment to acknowledge you. I want to acknowledge you for the great man you are, the great, mentor, inspiration, but most importantly, the amazing human being you are. The one thing I've really taken away from this conversation is just how much power is within us, and how the simplest way to unleash that power is to again exercise discipline, to take full responsibility and just take those daily steps every single day, rep after rep, set after set, especially on the days you don't feel like it. So I just want to thank you for reminding us of that important lesson, and for reminding me and really just reminding me, what the game of life is all about. So thank you for
Oh
that,
no.
brother.
Well, hey man, my pleasure, and thank you for the kind words. And man, thanks, man. That's all I gotta say.
Yeah, absolutely. So folks, Such dropped so many valuable nuggets of wisdom that will not only help you succeed in sport, but more importantly, in the game of life. But as I like to remind you every week in the huddle, knowledge is potential power. It's the consistent and focused application of great knowledge that actually creates greater results in life. So, my challenge to you is to take one of these valuable nuggets of wisdom and go apply it to your life today. And as I like to remind you every week in the huddle, you are deserving of greatness. You are worthy of greatness. You are greatness. And my only ask from these conversations, if it resonated with you, if it touched your heart, then please share it with a friend, a loved one, a teammate, just someone you feel would benefit from listening to these positive, inspiring, and empowering ideas. The more people we have listening, understanding, and applying these simple principles to their life, the more blessed this world will be. As always, love having these conversations with you in the huddle. Have a blessed rest of your day, everyone.